Good afternoon. My name is Varus Soswe, Associate Professor from Switzerland in Fribourg, PhD in Philosophy, Ethics and Political Theory from Ottawa University. I will talk to you about cultural identity and intercultural relations, an Africanist view. That means a view, a conception propounded by an African thinker whose name is Cheikh Anta Diop. The course is divided into two parts. The first part will deal with definition of cultural identity, and the second will deal with intercultural relations. The course is to be counted among the courses given in culturology. The discipline is culturology, or the science of culture. Reference number of the course is 0006, version 6, module 1, reference number 0006.01.06. Thank you. I was saying that the view I wanted to share with you today is an Africanist view, the one shared, propounded, spreaded by Cheikh Anta Diop. First of all, who is Cheikh Anta Diop? Cheikh Anta Diop is a Senegalese man of science, a physician and chemist who has got a passion of history, especially anthropology, and who has worked almost all his life, his intellectual life, on African culture, especially African ancient tradition, the tradition of the Nile Valley, that means Egypt and Ethiopia, and the whole Black Africa as such. Cheikh Anta Diop is a Senegalese, I was saying, born in 1923 in the Cayor in Senegal, and died in 1986 at Dakar. As in conformity with his academic career, he claims to be a disciple of men of sciences such as Pierre Curie, Gaston Bachelard, and Theodore Monod. A scientific man himself, inventor, and the director of the radiocarbon 14 laboratory of Dakar. Is the director of the radiocarbon 14 laboratory of Dakar University, and one of the most elevated encyclopedic minds that Africa has ever got. He is the author of a work on nuclear physics. As I was saying, he is a physician, a chemist, and there is more to say, not only nuclear physics. Cheikh Anta Diop has also a great passion for archaeology and prehistory. I was saying, giving a place of importance to linguistic studies too. It is within this realm of learning of science, and as an anthropologist, historian, and humanist, he has brought his rigorous and pertinent researches on Black Africa, namely, as I was saying, ancient Egypt. The inferiority of ancient Egypt. Our man is therefore an Africanist, and more precisely, an Egyptologist of first order, to dedicate his whole life to the restoration of the image of Africa with this constant and strongest thesis: the anteriority of Egypt in the transmission of cultural values, knowledge, bodies of knowledge, and of the most vivid of spiritualities to Greece, and from Greece to the whole wide world. In other terms, the fundamental thesis that underlines and sustains all his researches in his own term is the following: Africa is the cradle of humanity, and ancient Egypt, Negro-African, that means ancient Egypt is a black African, rich and prosperous civilization of old, surpasses the whole wide world with her cultural, intellectual, and spiritual grandeur. 4,000 years ago and more. This is a shortened type of dating. That means in length of time, duration, he gave as the least we can say is 4,000 years of domination over the world, and 8,000 years and more over another datation in terms of duration of the domination of black Egypt, black Africa. The Negroid Egypt, the black Egypt, is the one who have invented, he said, Cheikh Anta Diop says, all the sciences and techniques, mathematics and philosophy, writing and religion, law and politics. The thesis in its own has been the object of the noble and unceasing struggle. The thesis of Cheikh Anta Diop has been the object of the noble and unceasing struggle waged by him in favor of the rehabilitation of Africa. Apart from the plethora of articles he has produced, here are some major works of Diop's unquenchable productive thirst. Nation nègre et culture. I will try to translate them in English. Nation nègre et culture, Negro Nations and Culture. He had written it published it in 1955. This work has been his doctoral research, and has brought him into many torments, many problems, because the work, his research, has not been accepted as a doctoral thesis in France in 1950. 1955, 1950, that has been the time he has written this thesis. The second, 1960, the cultural unity of Black Africa. The third is Black Africa, pre-colonial Black Africa also 1960. The fourth is the economic and cultural foundation of Black Africa federal state, also in 1960. You see that the man is really productive, 3 works in 1 year. The fifth is anteriority of black civilization, a myth or a historical truth. He has published it in 1967. Another is civilization or barbarism in 1981. He has also conducted linguistic researches and have written in 1988 rather, new researches on the ancient Egyptian and the Negro African modern languages, so as to show the linkage or the link between ancient Egyptian and the modern language of Black Africa. The history of Africa of old has been authenticated by many learned men of truth, African as well as European, such as Cheikh Anta Diop himself, Ibrahima Babakake. These are historians and men of sciences. Joseph Kizerbo, Theophile Obenga, the immediate or direct successor or disciple of Cheikh Anta Diop, Mbargane Gissé, Jacob Carothers, and Georgie J.M. James, the author of The Stolen Legacy, and many more, passing through the Greek classics and some of the honest Western thinker, European thinkers, such as the young Champollion le Jeune, Volney, and Amelino, etc. Africa, they say they all agreed, has played a great role in the history of world civilization from the dawn of civilization, which she has initiated down to our days, passing through the medieval era and Renaissance. Such is also Rabelais, the French man of letters, Rabelais' opinion, for example, according to whom this continent always brings something rare, uncommon. In French, ce continent a apporté et apporte toujours quelque chose de rare. An assertion with no negative connotation at all. The dark fate of Africa has started with the invention of the horrible enslavement machine and the concomitant trade at the beginning of the great modern findings, scientific findings. It is when the European men of sciences have started discovering or advancing, progressing in science, that the following truth that Africa has built or have given the world a great civilization, has been a great civilization in the past and have influenced greatly the Greek and the Roman greatly, and even the modern science greatly. This only has been dotted during the 19th century to be more closer to us, or from the 17th, 18th century. We especially think about Christopher Columbus, the so-called discovery of America. That was in the Renaissance era, the 15th century, where anthropologists have started beating down African image. We also recall the conscience of visceral venality. That means the attraction of the fact of being attracted by only material things, materialism, the European materialism of the slave traders, starting from them, the négriers, in relation with the enormous possibilities and riches of the wide uncultivated spaces of the Americas of the time, which had to be exploited by slaves without retribution or pay. This is shortly, to put it, what we can say about Cheikh Anta Diop, the personality and his main thesis. Now let's come back to our matter proper. That means the definition, cultural identity, the definition of cultural identity. How to define cultural identity? He who engage a definition of the notion of cultural identity has to know that two entities are left to him on the basis of which his undertaking will be fulfilled: an individual personality and a collective personality. These are the two entities that can help us define cultural identity. And these are the entities whereof a cultural identity can be an object of investigation, that means of science. Yet the first to be defined, the cultural identity of an individual personality, entirely depends on the parameters of the second, that means of the cultural identity. As soon as then the investigation concerns the individual personality, one has no other means than to search within the realm of the collective personality, cultural personality. We cannot define a given person's identity unless we situate him within a whole range of data pertaining to his origin, his family. It then follows, for example, his family, it then follows that the question to be answered to is this one: what helps define cultural identity of a given collective personality, of a given people or nation? And to this question, the answer is the following: three main factors contribute to a sound definition of a collective personality, which are the historical factor, the second, a linguistic factor, and the third, a psychological factor. The perfect or accomplished cultural identity depends on the simultaneous full presence of these factors within the within the personality, individual or collective. That means if we want to talk about the personality, the individual personality, or the cultural identity of the individual, or the collective identity of an individual, we have to take care that we analyze those entities within, from the point of view of these three factors. We have been saying the historical, the linguistic, and the psychological. This requirement, of course, corresponds to an ideal. Why is it an ideal? In reality, we see all kinds of transitions, ranging from this normal case to the extreme. That means the normal case, an ideal. The normal, the normal case is a given identity crisis. So if we start studying, investigating within the individual and a collective a personality or identity, this requirement is a standard or an ideal. Because in reality, all kinds of transition or metamorphoses that range from the normal case we know to the extreme in a given identity crisis caused by the attenuation of the distinctive factors enlisted above. There are degrees in these factors that enable us to have a variety of personal identity, authentic or disintegrated. Their specific combination give way to all kinds of possible cases, individual or collective. One factor may be fully at play, while the other may find its effects lessened, if not nil or zero, like in cases of a loss of the linguistic expression of a mother tongue in a diaspora. Since there is possibility for one or other factor to decrease in or lose its effect, the question remains to know which of the three factors is most important. In other words, which one of them is sufficient enough to help characterize the cultural personality in the absence of the others. Is there a sense at all asking this question? The question, which one of these factors is sufficient enough to help characterize the personal identity, the cultural personality, or in the absence of the others? Is such a case possible at all, that only one factor among the three will be sufficient enough to define a cultural personality? To answer this question requires from us a brief analytical survey of the relative importance of each of the three factors previously enumerated. The historical factor. The historical factor is the cultural cement which unites the disparate element of a people such to make a whole out of them. This is done in virtue of the sentiment of historical continuum lived or experienced by the whole collectivity. It is the historical consciousness thus engendered which enable the unified people to distinguish himself from a population whose constitutive element by definition are alien or foreign or strange from another. The market population of any great town is composed of foreign tourists coming from the 5 continents and among whom there is no cultural link or affinity at all. So the historical consciousness, by the sentiment of cohesion or unity which it creates, constitutes the fortress or rampart, the stronghold, the fortress of the most reliable and solid cultural security for a people. This is the reason why every people or cultural unit only searches to deeply know and live its true history, to transmit its historical memory to its offspring or generation coming. The essential thing for a people is to rediscover the fil conducteur, the continuum thread or line which links him to its forefathers, ancestors, as far as possible in the face of or in case of cultural aggressions of all sorts, in front of all the decaying factors of the external world. The cultural weapon, the most efficacious that a people can dispose of, is the sentiment of historical continuum. Therefore, the distraction of the historical conscience or consciousness in all time has formed a part and parcel. This is the reason why a part of and parcel of the colonizing techniques, the techniques of colonization, of enslavement and of debasement, bâtardissement of people. Because colonizers or the people animated by the destructive promptitude, destructive passion, cultural destructive passion, or whole people nation destructive passion, they know that this historical continuum is what protects the homogeneity or the sentiment of unity, of cohesion of a people. This is why all they want to do first is to break down this sentiment. The following passage of Perronet, quoted by J.G. Hardy, H-A-R-D-Y, is a proof of what we have just said. The policy of debasement, of distraction. Perronet, a French great man, was saying there is a discipline that I would like the disappearance of without any regret from our African school program. For example, he's talking about Africa. What he would like to disappear, he was a senator, he said is the colonial, is history. He wrote it in his colonial annals, Les Annales Coloniales. He said this is the discipline he would like to disappear or to be deleted from the African school program. Some readings done at the occasion of the French lesson suffices, he continued, to give them a notion of the power of our country. He's talking about France. Still, there are more simple way. There are more simple way. Let me word it out this way. There is a more simple way to give the young indigenous a neat or a precise idea of our force, the force of France. It consists in decorating the classroom with crossed manigola, that means guns, like the way military forces, police forces cross their guns on the floor when they are doing their manifestation or parade. Well, he said, this is the one simple way to give the young indigenous the neat or the precise idea of our force. This is constituting decorating the classroom with crossed manigolo, or guns, I translate this way, and erecting on the teacher's pulpit or desk a cannon of 75 in miniature. That only can replace history, he said, to a certain extent and for a given time. But one should not forget that one can be easily accustomed to spectre. Sparrows end up, because sparrows is a kind of bird, end up making their nets in the pocket of gentlemen who gesture in the cherry plantation, the cherry fruit plantation. That means even with this mean, crossing gown and putting a cannon of 75 in miniature on the teacher's pulpit or desk, will last just for will last just a while, just for a while. So one has to find another device to maintain the fear within the mind of the indigenous. There are possibilities of cultural aggressions related to the vital importance of this discipline that have brought developing countries such as Morocco, Algeria, etc. out of the colonial night and made them teach history as a national activity. They have chosen to teach history as a national activity program, school program. In all cases, the teaching of this discipline should particularly capture the attention of the state. It is plain, therefore, to see that the important thing for a given people is not the possibility to claim for a historical past more or less grandiose, but rather to be simply inhabited by the sentiment of continuum that so much characterizes the historical consciousness. It cannot occur that the small Albanian people from Albania, to envy the people of Britain. It cannot occur to them to envy the people of Britain for its historical brilliant past. The knowledge of its true past, whatever the nature, this is the most important fact. So, Albanian people should just satisfy themselves with the knowledge of their past. You don't need to envy Britain people from Britain, the English people. The knowledge of one's true past, whatever the nature, this is the most important fact. This supposes a research activity which entirely evolves in the scientific field, far from any ideological interference. Today it is well known by the UNESCO that Africans are able to engage in such activity, to conduct scientific researches. Indeed, UNESCO now possesses insightful documents in her archives on the matter that was not possible before because of ideologies of racist nature that have reduced Africans to the rank of beasts, to inferior creatures without intelligence or soul. UNESCO has exploited all means necessary to reassure nations of the world of the falsity of all the these pseudo-sciences bearing on the hierarchy of races, theses of racist inspiration. As an example, it has thoroughly undertaken the refutation of theses inspired by social Darwinism and other theses of the same kind via biology, psychology, anthropology. We have said before that a people without a historical conscience is a mere population. The horde, the herd, la horde of the French people. Excuse me. The herd or la horde of the French people people without the historical conscience or consciousness is a mere population, or mere a horde or herd. The loss of national sovereignty and of the historical conscience subsequent to an alien occupation of a long duration engenders the stagnation or even sometimes of the regression, the degradation and the partial return to a state of barbarism. This has been the case of Egypt under the Romans to believe Juvenal. The fact of a continuous loss of national sovereignty since the arrival of the Persians, the Pers, in 1525 before Christ. Egypt, which have civilized the world and which since 1600 before Christ under the reign of Hatshepsut, Hatshepsut, that Egypt have conquered oceans and giant vessels or boats in the direction of the country of Punt, P-O-U-N-T, have ended up that Egypt and all its army have ended up building only ships made of clay under the Romans during the 2nd century before Christ. The giant of civilization has ended up with no means to build boats, ships, vessels. All that has been left is what is necessary to have some ships made of clay. What is worst, Egypt has fallen in superstition and barbarism. Juvenal depicts the tribal struggles of two nomes or districts, such as Dendera and Hombos, of which the two terms are enemies and which have seized with sins of anthropophagy, the fact of eating man. This event had occurred under the consulate of Yuncus, Y-U-N-C-U-S, in 127 after Christ. Though Juvenal is an author of a partial mind vis-à-vis Eastern people, it should be admitted that there has been a real regression of the Egyptian civilization. This regression struck the Egyptian people themselves in its own cradle before all immigration flowed. And this, it is worth recalling, solely by alien occupation. A great enigma of history is brought to a new daylight. Why people responsible for great civilization suddenly fall so low, in particular people of Africa? What could then be called African history, since we are talking of historical facts? An Africanist view of cultural identity. Here, two levels of history should be distinguished. The one which is immediate, made of local histories, legends and so on, so dear, deeply and strongly lived or experienced, in which African people segmented or divided by diverse external forces, of which colonization is the principal one, are secluded, cut off, enclosed, sequestered, and do vegetate and decay today. This is the first level of history. The immediate, made of local history. This belongs to little people. People with no high or important cultural consciousness or wholeness, cohesion within a whole race. The second level, which is more general, is far retired in space and time and comprising the totality of our people, the totality, the whole race, which include the general history of Black Africa, such as restored today by the research from the point of view of a rigorously scientific investigation. Every particular history is that identified how this history, second level of history, is constructed. It is by collecting particular history after identifying them, pointing them out, by establishing and correctly situating, relating them to the general historical data or to parameters. The whole history of the continent is re-evaluated according to a new Unitarian standard or unitary standard, capable of revivifying and consolidating or strengthening all the inert element, that means the local history, of the ancient historical mosaic or diverse parcels. All this on the basis of concrete historical data, on the basis of established facts. It becomes evident that the sentiment of historical unity and by way of consequence of cultural identity, that the scientific research is able to make live by the African cultural consciousness is in the present time, that sentiment is not only qualitatively superior to or higher than all those known until now, but it also plays a first order protective or conservative role in this world characterized by the generalization of cultural aggression. Thus, a path of a recommendable research is there at hand for the purpose of reinforcing the sentiment of cultural identity of Negro African people. By dint of pursuing this kind of investigative activity, our people one day we'll discover that the Egyptian, Nubian civilization has played quite the same role vis-a-vis the African culture, like the antique Greco-Latin vis-a-vis the Western civilization. Here is what we find as a sound definition of historical identity, following Cheikh Anta Diop, of course. This is that we can say that a people grows out of prehistory the moment it becomes aware or conscious of the importance of historical event, up to the point of inventing a technique, oral or written, for its memorization and storage or accumulation. That means the gathering of historical events of whatever kind by means of oral or written technique. This is what helps a people memorize its whole identity, what defines his past and his present, and what can orient him or orientate him toward the future. This is what, following Cheikh Anta Diop, we define as historical identity. It's made of this, and that only can help a people step out of prehistory. Now the linguistic factor. The second factor, which is the linguistic factor, constitutive of the cultural personality and consequently of the cultural identity, we have said, is the linguistic factor. It will be difficult to say which of the two factors of the historical and the linguistic is the most important here. Montesquieu, the French philosopher, will be inclined to give primacy to the linguistic factor. He who wrote, "Until a vanquished people will forget his native tongue, he still can keep hope," underlying thereby the role of the language as a unique common denominator, as the most excellent trait or the most feature of cultural identity. But what does the African linguistic unity signify? Africa is a Tower of Babel, so to say, no more than Europe, which also counts more than 360 languages and dialects. The apparent linguistic unity does not exist at the scale of any continent. Languages do follow the current of migrations, the particular fate of people, and the fragmentation is the rule until an official effort, a political will tries to expand an expression in the detriment of others. Thus, the talk of an Ile-de-France, that of the kings of France, have been privileged in comparison with other dialects. The Picard from Picardy, the Provincial, and the Breton. The king of France have privileged one language or dialect over the others. Today, however, everybody knows, thanks to the linguistic research, that this surface heterogeneity of Europe hides a parental closeness, a profound linguistic unity which becomes more and more evident with the remontée, with the rising toward the Indo-European, which is the mother tongue, the ancestor from which derive all the actual and past ramifications of European languages, in virtue of a very complex evolution. If we nowadays talk about European linguistic unity, it is only at this profound niveau or level hewn up or highlighted and rendered to science by linguistic archaeology. Otherwise, French people, the English people, the Germans, the Italian, the Romanian, the people from Lithuania, and the Russians, etc., do understand each other in no way more than the Wolof, the Bambara, the Hausa, the Ewe, etc., the Zulu. We all have the same problem linguistically. But the African linguistic research of this last year has enabled to reach a degree where the parental link, the African linguistic unity in the genetic sense, is also evident than that of the great linguistic Indo-European family. And we see that the avenues that are offered to the affirmation and to reconsolidation of the African cultural identity. Likewise, it is the linguistic research, and solely this, which has very recently enabled the European of the 20th century to live the sentiment of their linguistic unity. Before the comparative grammatical researches of the German BOP in the 19th century, there has been no European linguistic unity or a sense, a conscience of faith, awareness of faith. In this matter, Africa may have been retarded for something more than a century in comparison with the Europeans. And African linguistic research should therefore be duly conducted so as to bring it home to our people the necessity to profoundly live their linguistic unity at the same rate than the European, despite the apparent heterogeneity of surface. The result obtained already enabled the fostering of cultural education program for the African consciousness in this direction. Very soon, and to their great surprise, African people will discover that it is an African language, typically Negro, that has been the most anciently written language of the history of humanity since 5,300 years ago in Egypt. While the most ancient testimonials or memories anterior to an Indo-European language, the Hittite, go as far back as the 18th Egyptian dynasty. That is, as far back as 1470 before Christ. And this probably under the influence of the political and cultural domination of the Middle East by Egypt. The African linguistic research offers us, then, a wonderful, abysmal, vertigo-like possibilities to the comparative linguistics, and it is going to overturn the traditional roles in this field. Whatsoever the case, it is by the study of the Egyptian Nubian languages that we introduce the historical dimension that since has been lacking in African studies. Every day that passes, the comparatism of the spirit of comparative studies that proceed from it enable to reinforce the sentiment of linguistic unity of Africans, consequently then, their sentiment of cultural identity. The recall of the historical and linguistic factors, a constitutive element of the cultural personality, brings to evidence and highlights the necessity of a total, complete remold of African teaching programs in the fields here above evoked: history, linguisticism, and psychology, for example, as well as the urgent need. It brings also to evidence and highlighted the urgent need to radically focus on these elements and recenter them on the Egyptian Nubian antiquities at the same rate as the Western teaching relies on the Greco-Latin antiquities. There is no other secure means more radical, more scientific, more sane or safe, and more salutary to reinforce the African cultural personality and consequently the African cultural identity. Well, if the Western turn to the Greco-Latin to know their past, why can African today turn to their Egyptian Nubian antiquities? Psychological factor, there is the third factor. The psychical factor is the most palpable of all of them at first sight, if ever it exists. If it exists, then it's the most important, most palpable anyway. The Greek physician Galen, who lived in the 2nd century after Christ, has brought the characteristic features of the Negro to two main types which seemed to him essential, fundamental. First, the immeasurable length of the sex of the Negro. Second, the hilarity, the strong propensity to laughing. This is the two features that help Gallienus, the Greek physician, define the Negro: immeasurable length of the sex and the hilarity or the propensity to laughing. The Negro is a hilarious being with a sex of an immeasurable length. To make us laugh. For Galen, these two traits or features, the first physical, the other moral, were sufficient to characterize the generic type of the black. Though Galen has been a usual visitor of the Memphis Temple's library, where he has been the last of the Greek learned men, 6th century after Hippocrates, to consult Imhotep annals. Imhotep, it's one of the first in history to have discovered medicine. There's the father of medicine, Imhotep, of ancient Egypt, before Hippocrates of the Greek, or Hippocrates, during the 6th century. So Galen, though a learned man, a man accustomed to data laid down by a great scientist, have defined the Negro with those two factors. The glamorous splendor of the Egyptian civilization was losing its power at that time when Galen has been the visitor, a usual visitor of the Temple of Memphis, the library of the Temple of Memphis. So the Egyptian civilization had been decaying and losing its powers, and Rome was dominating the world at that time. Galliano was born 3 years after the death of Juvenal. We witnessed the genesis of the black imagery there. We witnessed the genesis of the black imagery in the Western literature. This identification, unrefined, they are not polite identification, grotesque and uncivilized of the black from the standpoint of some psychological features more or less ill-drawn or sketched, will be pursued till our days by authors in want of ill definition, passing through the Count Gobineau. Gobineau is the one Count of France, the ideological ancestor of Nazism. For this latter, every art results from the marriage of the vegetative sensitivity or faculty of the Negro, the inferior quality, and the Apollonian white rationality, the superior or higher quality. Gobineau wrote, "Thus appear this conclusion full rigorous, that the source where all art spring from is alien to civilizing instincts. She is hidden, that source where all arts spring from is hidden in the blood of the blacks." We'll go and search for that source there in the blood of the black, vainly. He goes on, "It is, so to say, a very beautiful crown that I place upon the malformed head of the Negro," the deformed head of the Negro, "and a truly great honor to give him such, to gather around him the harmonious chorus of the muses," harmonious corpse or a body of the muses. The honor is not so great. Why? Because I did not say that all the periods, I think he's talking about a category of muses, were there gathered, or all the honor is there gathered, assembled. The most noble one were missing, he said, those who rely on reflection, those who want beauty preferably to passion. Let him be translated Odyssey verses. Let the black man be translated Odysseus verses, and namely Ulysses' encounter with Nausicaa. The sublime of an inspiration well thought or far-fetched, the black man will sleep. There is need for all beings to make sympathy expand the primary understanding of intelligence, and there lies the difficulty of the Negro. The artistic, Gobineau went on describing the black man, the artistic sensitivity or feeling of this being, in itself powerful above all expression, will thus necessarily remain limited to the most miserable uses. Consequently, among all the arts that the melanin creature prefers, that means the black man, melanin is the pigmentation, the element that give the black man his black skin. It's called melanin. Consequently, he said, among all the arts of the melanin creatures, prefers music, that the melanin creature prefers, music take the first place, in the sense that it caresses his ear with a succession of sounds, and it demands nothing to the thinking part of the brain, how much he remains alien to those delicate conventions for which the European imagination has learned to ennoble this sensation. He went on, the white sensuality, enlightened, governed by science and reflection, at the first measures will make itself a tableau, as often said. The Negro never sees any of these things. He never seizes the meanest part of them. But still, he never sees the meanest part of them. But still, let his instinct be awakened. Enthusiasm, emotion will be otherwise well intense than our content bliss and satisfaction of honest people. I figure to myself a Bambara witnessing. Bambara is an ethnic group from West Africa, in Mali, in Guinea, in where else? Mali, Guinea, essentially. I figure, I figure to myself a Bambara witnessing the execution of some of the airs that give him pleasure. His face burns out, his eyes glitter, he laughs, and his large mouth shows his white and acute teeth sparkling in the middle of his dark face. Enjoyment comes. Non-articulated sounds make effort to come out of his throat, compressed by passion. Big tears roll along even his prominent cheeks. A little bit more and he will start crying. That's a Bambara listening to music. The music stops and the Bambara is afflicted by fatigue, tiredness. He went on, the Negro thus possesses the sensual faculty to a highest degree, without which no art is possible. And on the other side, the absence of intellectual aptitude renders him completely unable of the cultivation of art, even the appreciation of what this noble application of intelligence of human beings can produce as elevated. To improve his faculties, he should make alliance with a race of a different endowment. The artistic genius, equally alien to the three great types, has only emerged as a consequence of the hymen, limen, the womb of the white and the black. That means the black needs the white to elevate his artistic genius, or cultivate it. Well, we know that this is not true. The Egyptian civilization, we continue, with its grandiose art, entirely due to the black people, stands as the most tangible formal denial of all the niaiserie, pseudo-scientific stupidities and constellations of errors of Gobineau. I repeat, the Egyptian civilization with its grandiose art, entirely due to black people, stands as the most tangible formal denial of all the niaiserie, pseudo-scientific stupidities and constellation of errors of Gobineau. To launch criticism against them will be a manifest loss of time. It is, however, worth noting that the intellectual and psychological climate created by all these kind of written works such as Gobineau's, has strongly conditioned the first definition that the Negro-African thinkers of between the two world wars have tried to give their own culture. The writings of Western people, men of science, have strongly conditioned the first definition that the Negro-African thinkers, people from the Negritude movement like Senghor, Léopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal and Aimé Césaire of Martinique, have tried to give their own culture. For example, the following definition of the Negro can be read through the New Illustrated Dictionary of Larousse of 1905. Negro, negress, in Latin niger, black, man, woman of a black skin, is the name especially given to the inhabitants of some countries who, from a race of black men inferior or low in intelligence to the white race, the so-called Caucasian. This strategy of alienation has got such an important impact or hold on the psychology of the black man himself that no matter the level of culture or education they have reached, even the most intellectually elevated of them still bear its stigmata. It's pressed on their brain, their mind. Only today we can say that even young people, teenagers, have rise above all those complex of inferiority. It results in a loss of confidence in the capacities of the race. If that's important, it is important to draw the world's attention to such plagues. For the children of all ages, white and black, an enterprise or act of sensitizing their opinion will awaken their consciousness. It will awake them from their cultural, intellectual, and spiritual sleepless slumber or lethargy and inform them about the civilizing role that Black Africa or any other great civilization of the past, in the past, has played. Thousands of years before the white civilization have opened her eyes on things pertaining to culture and civilization. This is also and mainly the view of Cheikh Anta Diop. Poets of the Negritude movement during the period preceding the independences have not got the appropriate scientific means to refute or challenge such errors. Even Cheikh Anta Diop, who dedicated his whole life to this kind of struggle, has seen, as we said before, his doctoral thesis rejected by his white masters. A thesis entitled, I recall, Nation Nègre et Culture, Negro Nations and Cultures. The scientific truth in the matter, said Cheikh Anta Diop, since that time has become so white or whitened, recycled, that with the help of writings such as the one of Levi Brule, all these assertions or theses propounded under the colors of scientific truths have been accepted even by black people. The Negritude is a literary movement, for people who ignore it. The Negritude literary movement have thus accepted this supposed inferiority and have stubbornly assumed it at the front of the world. And Mrs. have it spread out. Those who explore neither the oceans nor the sky. Messier is the literary leaders of the negritude. He is the one who invents the movement, who built or settled the cornerstone of the movement. And today he is the mayor of one district of Martinique. He has got it spread out. Those who explore neither the ocean nor the sky. And Leopold Sédar Senghor said, emotion is Negro and reason Hellenistic. At that time, today they will be saying something else if they are asked to define the Negro, or it's just reverie. Black people have thus been brought progressively to over-specify, to privilege maybe this third factor, the psychological, the psychic, constituted of the personality which all the other people simply call the national temperament, say patriotism, and which vary from the Slavic to the German, from the Latin to the Papou. The bent, the turn was too sliding, and the black people have followed it. This state of things was due to the fact that the psychological factor is traditionally apprehended or grasped qualitatively from the point of view of literature and of poetry in particular. All nations have praised its virtues, while the first two factors, the historical and the linguistic, can only be approached from the point of view of a rigorous scientific research. Today, however, to better grasp the cultural identity of peoples or nations, a scientific approach of the psychic or the psychological is also possible, worth trying even, via or by the use of a social historical method or method. This requires the attempt to answer the following questions. What are the psychological or cultural invariants or invariables that the political and social revolution, be they the most radical, do let unchanged? Safe, not only within people consciousness, but also within the mind of the leaders. What is there as a psychological or cultural invariables or invariants, never changeable, that is there and which never disappear. Which stand or have stood, which stand the political and social revolution of the radical one. What is there? If we try to answer such a question from the perspective of an analysis of the historical condition of a given people and of the African people in general, we'll soon obtain well elaborated result than before. It will appear that this communicative joyfulness Kobino was talking about, communicative joyfulness that leads us back to Gallien's time, far from being a permanent psychic trait or psychic feature of psychological characteristic, solely uniquely only due to the influence of the sun ray or sunshine. We'll see that far from being an influence of the sun, this communicative joyfulness is rather a consequence of strong, securing social communitarian structures, which has the virtue of anchoring our people in the present, here and now, hic et nunc, and preventing them from the worries of the morrows or days to come, prompting in them optimism, etc. While, in opposition, among the Indo-European, the social individualistic structure, on the contrary, engender worries or fears of all kinds, pessimism, uncertainties about tomorrows, moral solitude or loneliness, the tension towards the future, and all its beneficial, they have also beneficial aspect, incidences on the improvement of material life, etc. Today, with the occurrence all over the world of the dissolution or fragmentation of these structures inherited from the past, we witness a new moral and spiritual renaissance of peoples or nations, a new African moral consciousness, a new national temperament or patriotism are developing. And unless these structures resist, how could they resist, in fact? This phenomenon of spiritual metamorphosis or transformation will be amplified. Until now, the cultural characteristics that we have inherited from the past are the same that have been analyzed in the cultural unity of Black Africa, and these cultural characteristics are goodness, joyfulness, optimism, social consciousness of sense, etc. They are far from being fixed, unfortunately, unchanging, unfortunately, or permanent, unfortunately they are. So, rather, they are subject to change along with conditions of life, alongside with conditions of life. Africa has begun acknowledging the existence of consciences strongly individualistic, with all the well-known consequences. How then to explain the sentiment of cultural identity within this permanent change? What are the cultural invariants or invariables we have just talked about? It is not possible to answer this question in details here, but it is worth recalling at least that the historical and linguistic factors constitute quasi-absolute data. The historical and linguistic factor constitute quasi-absolute data, the touchstone, as compared with the permanent flux of psychical changes, metamorphosis. And what about the Black of the diaspora? The linguistic thread is broken, but the historical link remains stronger than ever, perpetuated by memory, by the souvenir or remembrance, just like the cultural heritage of Africa, tangible in the three Americas, attests the continuity of cultural habits. It has been said, even as far as we can remember, that the difference between the white American and his English ancestors, in any case European, is the Negro smile, so sympathetic, inherited from the domestic slave that brings the children up. This is the end of the first part of our lesson. We'll come to the second in some minutes. The second that will deal with intercultural relations. Thank you very much.